Right now, a single Italian family controls more industrial power than most European nations combined. We're talking about a dynasty that owns the world's third largest automaker, controls Ferrari, runs Juventus football club, and holds major stakes in the Economist magazine. Their wealth exceeds $15 billion, but that's not the shocking part. The shocking part is how they've done it. For 125 years, the Agnelli family has manipulated fascist dictators, collaborated with communist governments, survived 2 world wars, orchestrated political assassinations, and built the most sophisticated industrial empire in European history, all while most people have never heard their name. You drive their cars without knowing it. Stellantis, the company behind Jeep, Ram, Chrysler, Peugeot, Fiat, Alfa Romeo, and Maserati, is controlled by this one Italian family. That's over 6.1 million vehicles sold globally last year, generating $189 billion in revenue. More than Tesla, BMW, and Mercedes combined. But cars are just the beginning. They control Italy's most successful football club, which has won Serie A 36 times. They own newspapers that shape Italian politics. They influence European Union policy through their industrial lobbying network. When the Italian government needs economic advice, they call the Agnellis first. Here's what's staggering. This family has maintained power through the rise and fall of fascism, 2 world wars, communist uprisings, terrorist attacks, multiple economic collapses, and countless political scandals. They've made themselves indispensable to Italy itself, so essential that removing them would cause economic collapse. The Agnellis don't just own companies. They control the flow of industrial power across Europe. When they make decisions about car production, entire regions gain or lose thousands of jobs. When they shift investment strategies, governments scramble to accommodate them. When they threaten to move operations abroad, prime ministers personally intervene to keep them happy. Most powerful families build wealth in one generation and lose it in the next. The Agnellis have been growing stronger for 5 generations. They've survived fascist dictators who tried to control them, communist politicians who wanted to nationalize their factories, and terrorist groups who literally tried to kidnap them. They've mastered something that no other industrial dynasty has achieved, the ability to adapt to any political or economic system while maintaining absolute control over essential infrastructure. The Rockefellers dominated oil. The Rothschilds controlled banking. But the Agnellis, they've conquered something more fundamental, the machinery that makes modern civilization possible. This is the story of how one cavalry officer's son became the most powerful industrial family in Europe, and why they're planning to control the global economy for the next century. Today, John Elkann sits in his Turin office overlooking the Fiat factories where his ancestors built the foundation of Italian industry. He's worth $2.6 billion personally, but that number doesn't capture the real story. The real story is that he controls Stellantis, the world's 3rd largest automaker, with $189 billion in annual revenue. He chairs Ferrari, the most profitable luxury car company on earth. He runs Exor, a holding company with tentacles reaching into every sector of the global economy. Most importantly, he's the latest heir to a 125-year dynasty that has shaped European history more than most royal families. This wasn't supposed to happen. The Agnelli story begins in 1866 with Giovanni Agnelli, born into a middle-class family in Villar Perosa, a small Piedmontese town where nothing important had ever happened. His father was a minor landowner with modest investments. Giovanni had no industrial experience, no inherited wealth, and no obvious path to power. What he had was something far more dangerous, an obsession with understanding how industrial power really worked. While other young aristocrats focused on traditional privileges and social status, Giovanni studied the new machines revolutionizing European production. He visited factories, analyzed manufacturing processes, and developed theories about how mass production could transform entire societies. But Giovanni understood something that separated him from other industrial enthusiasts. He realized that controlling transportation was more powerful than controlling production. Anyone could build factories. But controlling how products moved from factories to markets, that was the key to economic dominance. In 1899, at age 33, Giovanni made the decision that would reshape European industry forever. He invested his modest savings in a new venture called Fabbrica Italiana Automobili Torino, Fiat. The automobile industry barely existed. Most people considered cars expensive toys for wealthy eccentrics. Giovanni saw something different. He saw the technology that would determine which nations dominated the 20th century. Giovanni's first investment was 400 euros, roughly $13,000 in today's money. Within 3 years, he controlled the company. Within a decade, he had built Fiat into Italy's largest automaker. Within 20 years, he had created an industrial empire that employed hundreds of thousands of Italians and generated more wealth than most government budgets. But Giovanni's real genius wasn't in building cars, it was in understanding power. He realized that industrial control could be converted into political influence, and political influence could be converted into even greater industrial control. This insight became the Agnelli family's secret weapon for the next century. The numbers tell an incredible story. In 1900, Fiat produced 24 cars with 35 employees. By 1910, they were Italy's largest automaker. By 1920, Giovanni had diversified into newspapers, insurance, aviation, and financial services. By 1930, the Agnelli empire controlled approximately 8% of Italy's entire industrial output. But the Agnellis didn't just build an industrial empire. They built a system for maintaining power, regardless of political changes. When fascists took control of Italy, the Agnellis collaborated. When communists threatened revolution, the Agnellis negotiated. When Democrats demanded reform, the Agnellis adapted. Each political transition made them stronger rather than weaker. They mastered the art of being indispensable to whatever government was in power, while maintaining private control over essential economic infrastructure. Today's Agnelli empire reaches far beyond automobiles. Through Exor, they control stakes in reinsurance, media, luxury goods, technology platforms, and financial services. They influence European Union industrial policy, shape Italian government decisions, and maintain private relationships with leaders across multiple continents. The family has survived and thrived through the collapse of the Habsburg Empire, 2 world wars, the rise and fall of fascism, communist uprisings, multiple economic recessions, terrorist campaigns specifically targeting industrial leaders, and the transformation of European markets through globalization and digitization. Most remarkably, each crisis strengthened rather than weakened their position. When competitors failed, the Agnellis acquired their assets. When governments needed economic assistance, the Agnellis became indispensable partners. When new technologies emerged, the Agnellis positioned themselves to control their development. The current generation faces challenges their predecessors never imagined: electric vehicle transformation, Chinese competition, climate change regulations, and European Union integration. But John Elkann has proven as adaptable as his ancestors. In 2021, he merged Fiat Chrysler with French automaker PSA to create Stellantis, instantly becoming one of the world's largest automotive companies. Behind the business success lies something more disturbing: a sophisticated system for manipulating democratic institutions while avoiding public accountability. The Agnellis influence Italian politics through newspaper ownership, economic leverage, and personal relationships that span multiple generations of political leaders. They've mastered what political scientists call structural power, influence that comes from controlling essential economic infrastructure rather than holding official positions. Politicians need their factories to remain in Italy. Workers need their jobs to feed their families. Suppliers need their contracts to stay in business. This dependency creates a form of private governance that operates parallel to democratic institutions. When the Agnellis make strategic decisions about factory locations, production levels, or employment numbers, they're essentially making policy decisions that affect millions of Italians, but they're accountable only to themselves and their shareholders. The Agnelli story reveals how modern democracies can be captured by private interests that become too important to challenge. It shows how industrial dynasties can accumulate power that rivals nation-states while maintaining the appearance of ordinary business operations. But to understand how one family achieved this unprecedented level of control over European industry, we need to go back to 1866 to a young cavalry officer named Giovanni Agnelli, who was about to discover something that would change the course of industrial history. Chapter 1. Humble Cavalry. Giovanni Agnelli was 23 years old and bleeding from a saber wound when he had the revelation that would create a European industrial dynasty. The year was 1889, and Giovanni was serving as a cavalry officer in the Royal Piedmontese army, stationed on the Austrian border during the final tensions of the Habsburg decline. Most young officers in his position focused on military advancement and social climbing through the traditional aristocratic networks of Turin society. But Giovanni was obsessed with something his fellow officers considered beneath their attention: the new industrial machinery that was beginning to appear in northern Italy's factories. During his military leave, instead of attending social gatherings or pursuing romantic adventures, Giovanni spent his time visiting the mechanical workshops and small manufacturing facilities that were springing up around Turin. He studied steam engines, analyzed production techniques, and interrogated factory owners about costs, efficiency, and market potential. His fellow officers thought he was eccentric. His family considered his industrial interests inappropriate for someone of their social standing. But Giovanni had discovered something that none of them understood. He was witnessing the birth of a new form of power that would soon make traditional aristocracy obsolete. The saber wound came during a training exercise with Austrian cavalry units, a diplomatic gesture designed to reduce tensions between the two armies. Giovanni's horse stumbled during a charge, throwing him directly into the path of an Austrian officer's training saber. The blade caught him across the left shoulder, creating a 6-inch gash that required immediate medical attention. While recovering in the military hospital, Giovanni had time to reflect on what he had witnessed during his factory visits. He realized that industrial machinery was fundamentally changing the relationship between human effort and productive output. A single steam engine could accomplish work that previously required dozens of men. New manufacturing techniques could produce goods faster, cheaper, and more consistently than traditional craftsman methods. But most importantly, Giovanni understood that whoever controlled this new industrial technology would control economic and political power in ways that traditional aristocracy never could. When Giovanni's military service ended in 1892, he faced a decision that would determine his family's future for generations. His father, Giuseppe Agnelli, expected him to manage the family's modest landholdings and agricultural investments around Villar Perosa. The income was comfortable, the social position was respectable, and the work was predictable. Giovanni chose a different path entirely. Using his military savings and a small inheritance from his grandmother, Giovanni enrolled in engineering courses at Turin's Royal Technical Institute. His family was scandalized. Engineering was considered a profession for middle-class tradesmen, not suitable for someone with aristocratic pretensions. Giovanni didn't care about social expectations. He was determined to understand industrial machinery well enough to exploit its potential for wealth generation and power accumulation. His engineering studies lasted 2 years and focused intensively on mechanical design, metallurgy, and production management. But Giovanni's real education came from the practical work he did in Turin's growing industrial district during his free time. He apprenticed himself unofficially to Carlo Racca, the owner of a small metalworking shop that produced components for textile machinery. Giovanni worked without pay, learning how machines were designed, manufactured, and maintained. He studied cost accounting, supply chain management, and customer relations. Most importantly, he learned to think systematically about how individual companies could be integrated into larger industrial networks that controlled entire production processes from raw materials to finished products. By 1894, Giovanni had identified what he believed was the most promising opportunity in Italian industry: automobile manufacturing. The technology was new, the market was undeveloped, and most existing manufacturers were small operations without sophisticated business strategies. Giovanni spent months analyzing the automobile companies that were beginning to emerge across Europe. He studied their production methods, financial structures, and market strategies. He identified their weaknesses and developed plans for how a more sophisticated organization could dominate the emerging industry. The automobile industry in 1894 consisted mostly of individual craftsmen building custom vehicles for wealthy customers. Production was slow, costs were high, and quality was inconsistent. Giovanni realized that applying mass production techniques to automobile manufacturing could revolutionize both the industry and transportation itself. But transforming this insight into reality required capital, technical expertise, and business partnerships that Giovanni didn't possess. He needed to find investors who shared his vision and technical specialists who could implement his production strategies. His breakthrough came through an unexpected connection with Count Roberto Biscaretti di Ruffia, a Turin aristocrat who had become fascinated with automobile technology. Biscaretti had been experimenting with automobile design and was looking for business partners to help commercialize his innovations. Giovanni and Biscaretti spent months developing plans for an automobile company that would combine advanced technical design with sophisticated business management. Their vision was unprecedented in Italy, a company that would mass-produce high-quality automobiles for middle-class customers rather than building custom vehicles for aristocrats. The business plan they developed would become the foundation for what eventually became the Fiat empire. They proposed raising substantial capital through public stock offerings, hiring the best technical talent available in Europe, and building manufacturing facilities capable of producing hundreds of vehicles annually. But most importantly, Giovanni insisted on maintaining control over strategic decision-making while bringing in outside investors for capital. He had studied how other industrial companies had been captured by their financiers, losing operational control to banking interests that didn't understand manufacturing. Giovanni's solution was to structure the company so that operational control remained with the founders, while financial investors received profits without voting power. This structure would become the template for how the Agnelli family maintained control over their growing industrial empire for the next century. In early 1899, Giovanni and Biscaretti had completed their preparations for launching the automobile company. They had identified potential investors, recruited technical staff, and secured manufacturing facilities in Turin. They had chosen a name, Fabbrica Italiana Automobili Torino, Fiat. On July 11, 1899, 30 investors gathered in the offices of notary Alfredo Reggio in Turin to sign the Articles of Incorporation for Fiat S.p.A. Giovanni Agnelli's initial investment was 400 lire, approximately $400 at the time, or about $13,000 in current value. But Giovanni's real contribution wasn't his modest financial investment. It was his understanding of how industrial control could be converted into economic and political power. He had spent 5 years developing strategies for building and maintaining control over essential infrastructure, and he was about to test those strategies on a scale that would determine the future of European industry. The first Fiat factory opened in 1900 with 35 employees, producing 24 automobiles in the entire first year. Production was slow, costs were higher than projected, and technical problems were frequent. Most observers considered the venture a typical small-scale experiment that would likely fail within a few years. Giovanni understood something different. He realized that automobile manufacturing was just the beginning. The real opportunity was to build an integrated industrial network that controlled every aspect of transportation technology: engine production, steel manufacturing, tire production, fuel distribution, and financial services for automobile purchases. Within 3 years, Giovanni had gained majority control of Fiat by systematically purchasing shares from other investors who became discouraged by slow initial growth. By 1902, he was the company's managing director. By 1906, Fiat was producing over 1,000 automobiles annually and had become Italy's largest automotive manufacturer. But Giovanni's ambitions extended far beyond building a successful automobile company. He was using Fiat as the foundation for creating an industrial empire that would influence Italian economic and political development for generations. The humble cavalry officer, who had once been wounded during a training exercise, was about to become the most powerful industrial leader in Italian history. Chapter 2: Industrial Revolution. By 1905, Giovanni Agnelli had discovered something that would transform him from a moderately successful automobile manufacturer into the architect of Italian industrial power. The secret was not building better cars, but controlling the entire system that made cars possible. While his competitors focused on improving engine design and manufacturing efficiency, Giovanni was quietly acquiring companies that supplied Fiat's raw materials, components, and distribution networks. He understood that whoever controlled the supply chain would eventually control the industry. His strategy was both brilliant and ruthless. Giovanni would identify Fiat's key suppliers, steel manufacturers, rubber companies, engine component producers, and systematically acquire ownership stakes in each of them. Sometimes this meant friendly negotiations with owners who needed capital for expansion. Other times it meant aggressive stock purchases that forced hostile takeovers. The steel industry provided Giovanni's first major acquisition target. Fiat required enormous quantities of high-quality steel for automobile frames, engines, and body panels. Instead of remaining dependent on outside suppliers, Giovanni acquired controlling interests in 3 Piedmontese steel companies between 1903 and 1906. This vertical integration provided immediate competitive advantages. Fiat could guarantee steel quality, control production schedules, and reduce costs by eliminating supplier profits. But more importantly, Giovanni now controlled steel supplies that his competitors needed. He could allocate the best materials to Fiat while forcing competitors to accept lower quality steel or pay premium prices. By 1906, this strategy had transformed Fiat from a small automobile company into the center of an integrated industrial network. Fiat controlled its own steel production, rubber manufacturing, component suppliers, and distribution networks. Competitors found themselves increasingly dependent on Fiat-controlled suppliers, giving Giovanni indirect influence over the entire Italian automobile industry. But Giovanni's most brilliant insight was understanding how industrial control could be leveraged into financial power. As Fiat's integrated network grew more valuable, he could use company assets as collateral for acquiring additional businesses. Each acquisition made the next acquisition easier to finance. In 1907, Giovanni established Istituto Finanziario Industriale (IFI), a holding company designed to manage his growing collection of industrial investments. IFI allowed Giovanni to coordinate strategy across multiple companies while maintaining separate public identities for each business. The holding company structure provided crucial advantages for long-term empire building. Giovanni could transfer profits between companies to optimize tax obligations, coordinate investment strategies across industries, and maintain family control even as individual companies grew large enough to require outside investors. IFI became the prototype for how the Agnelli family would maintain control over their expanding empire for the next century. Operational companies like Fiat could go public to raise capital, while strategic control remained concentrated in the private holding company structure controlled by family members. But Giovanni's industrial strategy extended beyond mere business expansion. He understood that economic power could be converted into political influence, and political influence could be used to create even greater economic opportunities. Starting in 1908, Giovanni began cultivating relationships with Italian government officials who controlled industrial policy, trade regulations, and military procurement contracts. He provided technical expertise to government committees studying industrial development, offered economic advice to politicians designing trade policies, and positioned Fiat as an essential component of Italian national security strategy. The relationship between Giovanni and Prime Minister Giovanni Giolitti became particularly important. Giolitti was leading Italy's industrialization efforts and needed private sector partners capable of building the manufacturing infrastructure required for national economic development. Giovanni positioned Fiat as the solution to Italy's industrial development challenges. He proposed expanding automobile production to serve civilian markets while building manufacturing capacity that could be converted to military production during wartime. This dual-purpose strategy made Fiat essential for both economic growth and national defense. In return for government support and favorable policies, Giovanni guaranteed that Fiat would maintain its headquarters and primary manufacturing operations in Italy rather than moving production to lower-cost countries. This commitment provided Italian politicians with job creation and economic development benefits that were essential for maintaining political support. The symbiotic relationship between Fiat and the Italian government became the foundation for the Agnelli family's political influence over the next century. Government officials needed Fiat's manufacturing capacity and employment levels to maintain economic stability. Fiat needed government policies that protected its market position and provided access to international opportunities. By 1910, this public-private partnership had transformed both Fiat and Italian industry generally. Fiat had become Italy's largest automobile manufacturer, employing over 2,500 people and producing nearly 3,000 vehicles annually. The company's integrated industrial network included steel production, rubber manufacturing, engine components, and financial services. But the numbers only told part of the story. Giovanni had accomplished something unprecedented in Italian business. He had made his private company indispensable to national economic policy while maintaining complete family control over strategic decision-making. When government officials needed technical advice about industrial development, they consulted Giovanni. When foreign investors wanted to enter Italian markets, they sought Fiat partnerships. When other Italian companies needed access to advanced manufacturing technology, they negotiated with Giovanni's network. This central position in Italy's industrial ecosystem provided opportunities for wealth accumulation that went far beyond Fiat's automobile profits. Giovanni could influence which suppliers received government contracts, which companies gained access to new technologies, and which industries received favorable regulatory treatment. The integrated network strategy was generating spectacular financial returns. Between 1905 and 1910, Giovanni's personal wealth increased by over 1,200%. IFI's portfolio value had grown even faster, reaching approximately 15 million lire by 1910, roughly $200 million in current purchasing power. But Giovanni understood that maintaining this industrial empire would require adapting to political and economic changes that he couldn't control. European governments were becoming more involved in industrial policy. International competition was intensifying as German and American manufacturers entered European markets. Labor unions were organizing workers and demanding higher wages and better working conditions. Most importantly, military tensions were escalating across Europe as the alliance systems that would eventually produce World War I solidified into opposing camps. Giovanni realized that industrial companies with international operations and government relationships would face unprecedented challenges during any future military conflict. His solution was to position Fiat as essential infrastructure for Italian national security, while maintaining the operational flexibility to adapt to different political environments. He diversified the company's product lines to include aircraft engines, military vehicles, and naval components. He established international partnerships that could provide access to foreign technologies and markets regardless of political relationships between governments. Most significantly, Giovanni began developing relationships with political leaders across the European political spectrum. He cultivated friendships with liberal Democrats who supported free market policies, socialist politicians who advocated worker rights, and conservative nationalists who prioritized military strength. This ideological flexibility would become the Agnelli family's greatest asset during the turbulent decades that followed. While other industrial leaders were destroyed by political changes they couldn't anticipate or adapt to, the Agnellis survived and thrived through fascism, war, revolution, and democratization. By 1914, Giovanni had transformed a modest automobile company into the foundation of Italian industrial power. But the ultimate test of his empire-building strategy was about to begin with the outbreak of World War I. The war would either destroy everything he had built or provide the opportunity to establish Agnelli dominance over European industry for generations to come. Chapter 3. Fascist Collaboration. In 1922, Giovanni Agnelli faced the most dangerous decision of his life. Benito Mussolini had just marched on Rome with 25,000 blackshirts, demanding that King Victor Emmanuel III appoint him Prime Minister of Italy. Most Italian business leaders were terrified. Mussolini's fascist movement represented radical political change that could destroy their companies through nationalization, revolution, or economic chaos. But Giovanni saw something different, an opportunity to transform Fiat from Italy's largest automobile company into the industrial foundation of a new European power. The decision Giovanni made in the weeks following Mussolini's takeover would secure Agnelli industrial dominance for the next century, while raising moral questions that continue to haunt the family today. Giovanni's relationship with fascism began years before Mussolini's rise to power. Since 1919, Italy had been convulsed by socialist uprisings, labor strikes, and economic instability that threatened private industrial ownership. Factory occupations by communist workers had paralyzed production at companies across northern Italy. Revolutionary violence had targeted business leaders and government officials. Fiat had been particularly affected by the labor unrest. Communist organizers had led strikes that shut down automobile production for weeks at a time. Worker councils had attempted to take control of factories and implement socialist production methods. Revolutionary activists had threatened Giovanni personally, forcing him to hire private security guards and vary his daily routines. Giovanni understood that Italy's existing political system couldn't control the revolutionary movement that was threatening to destroy private enterprise entirely. Liberal democratic institutions were too weak to maintain order. Conservative politicians lacked popular support. Socialist leaders were either unwilling or unable to control their radical followers. When Mussolini emerged as the leader of a movement that promised to restore order while preserving private ownership, Giovanni saw a potential solution to the crisis threatening Italian capitalism. But Giovanni's support for fascism wasn't based solely on fear of socialist revolution. He understood that fascist ideology, properly managed, could provide opportunities for unprecedented industrial expansion under government protection and subsidy. Fascist economic theory emphasized national self-sufficiency through domestic industrial development. This meant massive government investment in manufacturing infrastructure, protection from foreign competition, and coordination between private companies and state planning. For a company like Fiat, fascist economics promised guaranteed markets, subsidized expansion, and political protection from both international competitors and domestic opposition. Giovanni began cultivating relationships with fascist leaders months before Mussolini's march on Rome. He provided financial support to fascist publications, hosted social gatherings for fascist intellectuals, and offered Fiat facilities for fascist political rallies. Most importantly, he developed a personal friendship with Mussolini himself. The relationship between Giovanni and Mussolini was complex and carefully managed by both men. Mussolini needed industrial support to transform fascist political control into economic development that would justify his regime to the Italian people. Giovanni needed political protection to expand Fiat's operations without interference from socialist opposition or international competition. Their first major collaboration involved Fiat's expansion into aircraft manufacturing. Mussolini was determined to build Italian military aviation capabilities that could compete with other European powers. Giovanni offered to convert Fiat's automobile manufacturing expertise into aircraft engine production, providing the technological foundation for Italian air power. The aircraft partnership provided enormous benefits for both men. Mussolini gained access to advanced manufacturing technology and could claim credit for Italian industrial achievements. Giovanni gained guaranteed government contracts, protection from labor unrest, and access to military technologies that could be adapted for civilian automobile production. But the collaboration went far deeper than military contracts. Giovanni and Mussolini developed a comprehensive strategy for coordinating Italian industrial development with fascist political objectives. Fiat would serve as the flagship company, demonstrating how private enterprise could flourish under fascist guidance, while contributing to national power and prestige. Under this partnership, Fiat received unprecedented government support. Protective tariffs eliminated foreign automobile competition in Italian markets. Government agencies became major Fiat customers, purchasing vehicles for civilian and military use. State investment banks provided favorable financing for Fiat expansion projects. The results were spectacular. Between 1922 and 1929, Fiat's automobile production increased by over 400%. Employment grew from 12,000 to over 35,000 workers. Company revenues expanded faster than any other major European automobile manufacturer. But the government support came with strings attached that would eventually compromise the Agnelli family's independence and moral reputation. Mussolini expected Fiat to support fascist political objectives, even when those objectives conflicted with sound business principles. Starting in 1925, Fiat was required to implement fascist labor policies that subordinated worker interests to state ideology. Independent labor unions were replaced with fascist-controlled worker organizations that prioritized production, increases over wage improvements or working condition reforms. Fiat factories became showcases for fascist industrial policy. Government officials brought foreign delegations to tour Fiat facilities as demonstrations of Italian industrial achievement under fascist leadership. Worker rallies at Fiat plants were organized to show support for Mussolini's regime and its economic policies. Giovanni was appointed to government committees that coordinated industrial policy with fascist political objectives. He served on the Council of Corporations that was designed to integrate private companies into state economic planning. He participated in trade missions that promoted Italian industrial exports to other fascist-aligned governments. Most controversially, Giovanni provided personal financial support to fascist political activities and propaganda efforts. He contributed to fascist publications that promoted industrial development under authoritarian guidance. He funded youth organizations that indoctrinated young Italians with fascist ideology. He supported political candidates who advocated fascist economic policies. By 1930, the collaboration between Fiat and the fascist government had made Giovanni one of the most powerful individuals in Italy. His industrial empire controlled approximately 12% of Italian manufacturing output. His political influence shaped government policies affecting millions of Italian workers. His personal wealth had grown to levels that rivaled European aristocracy. But Giovanni understood that his partnership with fascism was fundamentally unstable. Fascist ideology demanded increasing political control over private enterprise. Mussolini's international ambitions were creating military commitments that could lead to devastating wars. The authoritarian political system was generating internal opposition that could eventually threaten both fascist rule and the businesses that supported it. Giovanni's solution was to maintain superficial support for fascist ideology while secretly preparing for political changes that might require different strategies. He continued public collaboration with Mussolini's government while privately diversifying his investments, establishing international business relationships, and positioning Fiat to survive potential regime change. The strategy required extraordinary political sophistication and moral flexibility. Giovanni had to balance fascist demands for ideological conformity with business requirements for operational efficiency. He needed to maintain Mussolini's trust while avoiding commitments that could destroy Fiat if fascist rule collapsed. Most difficult, Giovanni had to manage the moral contradictions inherent in collaborating with a political movement that was increasingly using violence, repression, and war to maintain power. His business success was becoming dependent on a regime that was systematically destroying Italian democracy and preparing for aggressive military expansion across Europe. By 1935, these contradictions were becoming impossible to ignore. Mussolini's invasion of Ethiopia demonstrated the regime's commitment to imperial expansion that could eventually involve Fiat in military conflicts beyond Italian borders. Fascist racial laws were targeting Italian Jewish citizens, including some of Fiat's employees and business partners. Increasing coordination with Nazi Germany was associating Italian fascism with even more extreme ideological positions. Giovanni's response revealed the moral compromises that industrial collaboration with authoritarianism required. He continued supporting Mussolini's government while trying to minimize Fiat's involvement in the most objectionable fascist policies. He maintained business relationships with Jewish partners while avoiding public opposition to anti-Semitic legislation. He expanded military production while attempting to limit Fiat's role in actual combat operations. But by 1940, these compromises were no longer sufficient. Mussolini's decision to enter World War II as Germany's ally would force Fiat into direct involvement in military aggression that Giovanni had hoped to avoid. The collaboration between Giovanni Agnelli and Italian fascism had secured Fiat's industrial dominance and generated unprecedented family wealth, but it had also committed the company to political and military adventures that could destroy everything the Agnellis had built if fascist ideology led Italy to military defeat and political collapse. The ultimate test of Giovanni's empire-building strategy was about to begin with World War II. Chapter 4. War Survival. On June 10, 1940, when Mussolini declared war on Britain and France, Giovanni Agnelli realized he had made a catastrophic mistake. His 20-year collaboration with fascism was about to drag Fiat into a military conflict that could destroy the industrial empire he had spent 4 decades building. Within weeks of Italy's entry into World War II, Fiat's factories were converted from civilian automobile production to military manufacturing. The company became one of Italy's largest producers of aircraft engines, military vehicles, artillery components, and submarine parts. Nearly 80% of Fiat's production capacity was dedicated to supporting Mussolini's war effort. But Giovanni understood something that Mussolini refused to acknowledge. Italy lacked the industrial capacity, natural resources, and military technology necessary to compete with Britain, the Soviet Union, and the United States. The war was unwinnable, and Fiat's survival depended on positioning the company to survive Italy's inevitable defeat. His strategy for wartime survival required extraordinary political sophistication and moral flexibility. Giovanni had to maintain apparent loyalty to fascist war goals while secretly preparing for regime change, Allied occupation, and potential war crimes prosecutions that could target business leaders who had collaborated with Mussolini's government. The first challenge was managing Fiat's workforce during wartime production demands. The company employed over 55,000 workers by 1941, making it one of Europe's largest industrial employers. Maintaining production required preventing labor unrest, sabotage, or mass resignations that could shut down military manufacturing essential to Italian war efforts. Giovanni's solution was to provide Fiat workers with better wages, working conditions, and job security than workers at other Italian companies received. Despite wartime shortages and government wage controls, Fiat employees received food rations, housing assistance, and medical benefits that made employment at the company highly desirable. But the strategy went beyond material incentives. Giovanni understood that workers' political loyalty was fragile and could shift rapidly if Italy's military situation deteriorated. He needed to build relationships with both fascist loyalists and underground opposition groups to ensure Fiat's survival, regardless of who controlled Italy after the war. Through intermediaries, Giovanni began providing subtle support to anti-fascist resistance organizations operating in northern Italy. This support included allowing resistance members to work in Fiat facilities, providing access to communications equipment and transportation resources, and sharing intelligence about German military activities in Italian industrial areas. The resistance connections served multiple purposes. They provided Giovanni with information about underground political developments that could affect Fiat's post-war situation. They demonstrated to potential Allied occupation authorities that Fiat had supported anti-fascist activities despite official collaboration with Mussolini. Most importantly, they created obligations among resistance leaders who might control Italian politics after fascist collapse. But maintaining relationships with both fascist authorities and resistance organizations required careful balancing of competing demands and expectations. Giovanni had to continue military production that supported Mussolini's war effort while secretly assisting activities that undermined fascist control. The most dangerous period came after September 1943, when Italy's government surrendered to Allied forces and German troops occupied northern Italy to continue fighting. Fiat's facilities became strategically important to German defense plans, making the company a target for Allied bombing while subjecting it to direct German control. German occupation authorities demanded that Fiat increase military production while providing manufactured goods for German military forces. They installed German managers in key positions and required detailed reporting on production levels, worker productivity, and security measures. Any sign of sabotage or resistance activity could result in factory closures, mass arrests, or executions. Giovanni's response demonstrated the survival skills that would characterize Agnelli family strategy for generations. He provided enough cooperation to avoid German retaliation while creating opportunities for resistance activities that could benefit Fiat's post-war position. Working with resistance contacts, Giovanni organized systematic sabotage activities designed to reduce military production without creating obvious evidence of deliberate destruction. Production equipment would malfunction due to maintenance problems. Essential raw materials would be misdirected to facilities where they couldn't be used effectively. Quality control would fail to catch defective products until they reached German military units. The sabotage campaign was extraordinarily dangerous. Discovery would have resulted in Giovanni's execution and Fiat's complete destruction. But the strategy provided crucial advantages for post-war survival. Reduced military production meant less contribution to German war efforts, potentially reducing war crimes charges. Demonstrated resistance activity could provide evidence of anti-fascist loyalty during Allied occupation. Most importantly, the sabotage network created relationships with resistance leaders who would become important political figures in post-war Italy. These relationships would prove essential when Allied authorities investigated Fiat's wartime collaboration and considered whether to confiscate company assets or prosecute company leadership. The liberation of northern Italy in April 1945 created immediate challenges that could have destroyed Fiat entirely. Allied authorities were tasked with identifying and punishing Italian industrialists who had collaborated with fascist and German forces. Many business leaders were arrested, their companies were confiscated, and some were tried for war crimes. Giovanni's survival strategy during the first months of Allied occupation revealed the sophisticated political network he had built during the war years. Resistance leaders who had worked with Fiat's underground network testified that Giovanni had secretly supported anti-fascist activities. Allied intelligence officers who had been briefed by resistance contacts confirmed that Fiat had provided assistance to Allied military objectives. But Giovanni's most important asset was his relationship with Vittorio Valletta, Fiat's operational manager, who had maintained the company during wartime while Giovanni focused on political survival. Valletta had impeccable technical credentials and no obvious fascist political connections, making him an ideal candidate to represent Fiat during Allied investigations. In June 1945, Allied authorities removed Giovanni from Fiat's leadership and appointed Valletta as interim manager pending investigation of the company's wartime activities. This transition allowed Giovanni to avoid direct accountability for wartime collaboration while maintaining family influence over company strategy through Valletta's management. The investigation of Fiat's wartime activities lasted nearly 2 years and involved detailed examination of production records, financial transactions, and employee testimonies. Allied investigators found evidence of collaboration with fascist and German authorities, but they also discovered documentation of resistance support and sabotage activities that complicated simple judgments about the company's wartime loyalties. Ultimately, Allied authorities concluded that Fiat's survival and continued operation were more important to Italian economic recovery than punishment for wartime collaboration. The company employed tens of thousands of workers, controlled essential manufacturing infrastructure, and possessed technological capabilities that were needed for post-war reconstruction. In 1947, Giovanni was officially cleared of war crimes charges and allowed to resume control of Fiat. The company emerged from World War II with its industrial capacity intact, its workforce expanded, and its political relationships strengthened through successful navigation of the transition from fascist collaboration to democratic legitimacy. But the wartime experience had taught Giovanni crucial lessons about power, survival, and moral flexibility that would guide Agnelli family strategy for generations. Industrial success required adapting to any political environment while maintaining operational control over essential infrastructure. Survival during political transitions required building relationships across competing factions, while avoiding ideological commitments that could become liabilities. Most importantly, Giovanni had learned that being indispensable was more powerful than being right. Fiat's survival depended not on moral purity or political consistency, but on making the company so essential to Italian economic function that destroying it would cause unacceptable damage to broader social and economic stability. This lesson would guide the Agnelli family through the Cold War, Italian political instability, terrorist campaigns, and economic transformations over the following decades. They had mastered the ultimate survival skill, making themselves too important to fail. Chapter 5. Economic Miracle. In 1950, Gianni Agnelli stood on the balcony of his grandfather's Turin mansion, surveying the Fiat factories that stretched across the Mirafiori district like a mechanical city. At 29 years old, he was about to inherit control of an industrial empire that had survived fascism and World War, but faced challenges that could either destroy the company or transform it into the foundation of unprecedented European wealth. Gianni understood something that would make him the richest man in modern Italian history. The post-war economic boom represented the greatest wealth accumulation opportunity in European history, but capturing that opportunity required thinking beyond traditional manufacturing into the systematic control of economic infrastructure. Italy's economic miracle between 1950 and 1970 would see GDP growth averaging 6% annually, faster than any European economy except West Germany. But Gianni realized that simply participating in this growth wasn't sufficient for building lasting dynastic power. The Agnellis needed to position themselves at the center of Italy's economic transformation while diversifying beyond automobile manufacturing into sectors that would control Italian capitalism for generations. The strategy Gianni developed would make the Agnelli family indispensable to Italian economic function while accumulating wealth that exceeded most national treasuries. Gianni's first insight was that post-war automobile demand would be fundamentally different from pre-war markets. Instead of building luxury vehicles for wealthy customers, the future belonged to mass-produced cars for middle-class families who were entering the consumer economy for the first time. But mass production required manufacturing capabilities that Fiat didn't possess in 1950. The company's factories had been designed for military production during the war and needed complete reconstruction for efficient civilian automobile manufacturing. Achieving the production volumes necessary for mass market success would require investments that exceeded Fiat's available capital. Gianni's solution was to leverage Marshall Plan reconstruction funding while simultaneously expanding Fiat's operations into sectors that would benefit from European economic integration. Between 1950 and 1955, Fiat received over $40 million in US reconstruction aid that was used to build the most advanced automobile manufacturing facilities in Europe. The new Mirafiori plant that opened in 1952 was a marvel of industrial engineering. Capable of producing 600,000 vehicles annually, it was larger than most European automobile manufacturers' entire operations. Assembly line techniques adapted from American manufacturers enabled production efficiency that made Fiat cars competitive in international markets while generating substantial profit margins. But the real breakthrough was the Fiat 600, launched in 1955. Priced at approximately 590,000 lire, about $950, the 600 was affordable for Italian middle-class families while sophisticated enough to compete with German and French imports. Within 3 years, Fiat was selling over 400,000 vehicles annually and had captured 85% of the Italian automobile market. The 600's success generated cash flows that enabled Gianni to implement the diversification strategy that would transform the Agnellis from automobile manufacturers into controllers of Italian capitalism. Between 1955 and 1960, Fiat used automobile profits to acquire controlling interests in companies across multiple sectors: steel production, construction machinery, telecommunications, aviation, and financial services. Each acquisition was carefully chosen to strengthen Fiat's competitive position while creating new revenue streams that didn't depend on automobile sales. Steel companies provided raw materials for Fiat manufacturing while selling products to construction companies, building Italy's new infrastructure. Telecommunications investments positioned Fiat to benefit from the communication networks that would enable economic integration across Europe. But Gianni's most brilliant strategic insight was understanding how financial services could amplify industrial control. In 1958, he established SAVA, Società per Azioni Vendite Automobilistiche, a financing company that provided loans for Fiat automobile purchases. SAVA enabled customers to buy Fiat cars with affordable monthly payments rather than cash purchases, dramatically expanding the potential market. The financing operation provided multiple competitive advantages. Customers who borrowed money through SAVA were more likely to purchase Fiat vehicles rather than competitors' products. The loan servicing provided ongoing relationships with customers that could be leveraged for additional sales. Most importantly, the financing operation generated profits from both automobile sales and financial services. By 1960, Fiat controlled not just automobile manufacturing, but significant portions of the industries that supplied raw materials, financed purchases, and provided infrastructure support for the Italian automotive sector. This integrated approach meant that competitive threats to Fiat's automobile business could be addressed through the broader industrial network rather than direct manufacturing competition. The diversification strategy was generating spectacular financial returns. Between 1955 and 1965, the Agnelli family's wealth increased by over 2,300%. Fiat employed over 100,000 people and controlled approximately 4.4% of Italy's total GDP. Gianni had become not just Italy's richest individual, but one of the most powerful economic actors in post-war Europe. But Gianni understood that maintaining this dominance would require political relationships that protected Fiat's market position while enabling international expansion. Italy's entry into the European Economic Community in 1957 created both opportunities and threats that would determine whether Fiat could compete successfully against German, French, and British manufacturers. His solution was to position Fiat as essential infrastructure for Italian participation in European integration while building personal relationships with political leaders across multiple countries and ideological perspectives. Gianni cultivated friendships with Christian democratic politicians who controlled Italian government policy, social democratic leaders who shaped European integration policies, and conservative politicians who influenced international trade regulations. The political network served multiple purposes. Fiat received favorable treatment in government procurement contracts, regulatory policies that protected domestic market share, and diplomatic support for international expansion efforts. But more importantly, the relationships provided advance information about political developments that could affect business operations and investment strategies. Gianni's political sophistication was demonstrated during the turbulent 1960s when Italy faced significant social and economic disruptions. Student protests, labor strikes, and political terrorism threatened the stability that had enabled Italian economic growth since the 1950s. Many business leaders feared that political instability could lead to socialist policies that would nationalize private companies or impose confiscatory tax rates. Gianni's response revealed his understanding of how economic power could be used to shape political outcomes. Instead of simply opposing political change, he positioned Fiat as the solution to Italy's economic challenges, while supporting moderate reforms that would satisfy political demands without threatening private enterprise. When labor unions demanded higher wages and better working conditions, Gianni negotiated agreements that provided worker benefits while maintaining productive efficiency. When student protesters criticized capitalism, he funded educational programs that promoted Italian industrial achievements while addressing legitimate concerns about economic inequality. Most importantly, when political extremists attempted to use terrorism against Italian business leaders, Gianni cooperated with security services while demonstrating that Fiat's continued success was essential for Italian economic stability and social progress. The strategy was extraordinarily successful. While other European countries experienced political polarization that disrupted economic growth, Italy maintained the political stability necessary for continued expansion. Fiat's employment levels, wage payments, and tax contributions became arguments for policies that supported private enterprise and international integration. By 1970, Gianni had transformed Fiat from a regional automobile manufacturer into the foundation of Italian participation in the global economy. The company controlled multiple industries, employed hundreds of thousands of workers, and generated revenues that influenced Italian government fiscal policies. But perhaps most importantly, Gianni had established the template that would enable the Agnelli family to maintain control over Italian economic development for the next 50 years. They had made themselves indispensable to Italian prosperity while building political relationships that transcended particular governments or ideological movements. The economic miracle had provided the foundation for permanent Agnelli dominance over European industry. But maintaining that dominance would require adapting to new challenges: international competition, technological change, and political developments that would test whether the strategies that succeeded in post-war Italy could survive in an increasingly complex global economy. Chapter 6: Global Empire. In 1976, Gianni Agnelli made a decision that shocked the European automotive industry. He would make Fiat the first Western company to build a complete automobile factory inside the Soviet Union, manufacturing vehicles for the communist market while maintaining capitalist control over the most advanced automotive technology in Eastern Europe. The Soviet deal represented something unprecedented in Cold War business relations. While Western governments and communist authorities viewed each other with suspicion and hostility, Gianni had identified an opportunity to profit from both sides of the ideological divide while positioning Fiat as an essential bridge between competing economic systems. The strategy would transform Fiat from a successful European company into a global industrial empire that operated across every continent while maintaining family control over strategic decisions that affected millions of workers and consumers worldwide. Gianni's decision to enter the Soviet market emerged from his analysis of global automotive industry trends during the early 1970s. American and Japanese manufacturers were expanding internationally through standardized production methods and global marketing strategies. European companies that remained focused on domestic markets would eventually be overwhelmed by competitors with larger production volumes and lower per-unit costs. But Gianni understood that simple international expansion wasn't sufficient for long-term survival against American and Japanese competition. Fiat needed to develop competitive advantages that couldn't be replicated by larger competitors, advantages that came from accessing markets and technologies that other companies couldn't reach. The Soviet Union represented exactly this kind of opportunity. Communist economic planners needed Western automotive technology to modernize Soviet transportation infrastructure, but ideological barriers prevented most Western companies from establishing operations behind the Iron Curtain. Fiat's willingness to work within communist economic structures could provide access to markets totaling 280 million consumers while excluding all other Western competitors. Negotiating the Soviet agreement required navigating the most complex business and political challenges that any Western company had attempted during the Cold War. Soviet authorities demanded technology transfers that would enable independent production capabilities, while Italian and American governments insisted that strategic technologies not be shared with potential military adversaries. Gianni's solution demonstrated the sophisticated political network he had built over 2 decades of managing Fiat's relationship with Italian governments. He enlisted Italian Communist Party leaders to provide credibility with Soviet negotiators, while assuring NATO allies that the agreement wouldn't compromise Western security interests. The key insight was structuring the Soviet operation to provide technology access without transferring strategic capabilities that could be used for military purposes. Fiat would license production methods and provide technical training while maintaining control over advanced engine designs and electronic systems that had potential military applications. After 3 years of negotiations, the agreement was signed in 1976. Fiat would build a complete automotive manufacturing complex in the Soviet city of Togliatti, producing vehicles based on Fiat designs for sale throughout the communist bloc. The facility would employ 60,000 Soviet workers and produce 660,000 vehicles annually, larger than most Western automobile companies' entire operations. The financial terms were extraordinary. The Soviet government would pay Fiat $3.2 billion over 10 years for technology licenses, equipment, and technical services. Fiat would receive additional revenues from ongoing royalty payments and component sales. Total projected income exceeded $8 billion, more than double Fiat's annual revenues from all other operations combined. But the Soviet deal was just one component of Gianni's global expansion strategy during the 1970s. While building communist bloc operations, he was simultaneously establishing Fiat manufacturing facilities in Brazil, Argentina, Turkey, Spain, and Yugoslavia. Each operation was structured to serve regional markets while contributing to Fiat's global production network. The Brazilian operation, established in 1976, demonstrated how Fiat could adapt to local market conditions while maintaining strategic control. Brazil's military government wanted automotive manufacturing that would provide employment while reducing dependence on imported vehicles. Fiat proposed building cars specifically designed for Brazilian road conditions and consumer preferences while incorporating global production standards. The adapted vehicles were enormously successful in Latin American markets. By 1980, Fiat's Brazilian operation was producing over 300,000 vehicles annually and had captured 25% of the Latin American automobile market. More importantly, the Brazilian facility provided a manufacturing base for expanding into other Latin American countries that were too small to support independent operations. Similar strategies were implemented across multiple continents. Spanish operations focused on European export markets. Turkish facilities served Middle Eastern customers. Yugoslav partnerships provided access to non-aligned countries that maintained relationships with both Western and communist governments. By 1985, Fiat was operating manufacturing facilities in 12 countries and selling vehicles in over 60 national markets. Total employment exceeded 350,000 workers worldwide. Annual revenues had grown to over $25 billion, making Fiat one of the largest industrial companies in the world. But global expansion created management challenges that required organizational innovations beyond traditional corporate structures. Coordinating production, technology development, and marketing across multiple countries with different legal systems, currencies, and political environments required new approaches to corporate governance and strategic planning. Gianni's solution was to reorganize the Agnelli industrial empire around the holding company structure that Giovanni had established in the 1920s, but updated for global operations. Exor, previously IFI, became the central coordination mechanism for all Agnelli investments, with operational companies in different countries maintaining local management while reporting to centralized strategic planning. The holding company structure provided crucial advantages for global operations. Profits could be optimized across multiple tax jurisdictions. Currency risks could be managed through international financial markets. Political risks in individual countries could be managed through diversified operations that weren't dependent on any single government or market. Most importantly, the structure maintained Agnelli family control over strategic decisions while enabling professional management of complex international operations. Local managers had operational autonomy to adapt to regional conditions, but major investments, technology sharing, and expansion decisions remained concentrated in Turin under Gianni's personal direction. The global expansion strategy was generating spectacular financial returns. Between 1970 and 1985, Agnelli family wealth increased by over 800%. Fiat controlled approximately 12% of global automobile production outside the United States and Japan. The company's international operations were generating higher profit margins than traditional European manufacturing, while providing access to faster-growing markets in developing countries. But Gianni understood that global industrial dominance required more than manufacturing operations. Controlling international markets meant influencing the political and economic policies that determined market access, trade regulations, and technology standards across multiple countries. His solution was to build political relationships with government leaders worldwide while establishing Fiat as essential infrastructure for economic development in countries seeking industrial modernization. This meant providing more than automobile manufacturing. It meant offering comprehensive industrial development programs that included worker training, technology transfer, and local supplier development. The political influence strategy was most successful in developing countries where Fiat operations became significant factors in national economic performance. In Brazil, Fiat employment and tax payments influenced government industrial policies. In Turkey, Fiat technology transfers supported broader manufacturing development. In Eastern Europe, Fiat operations provided Western technology access that communist governments used to justify economic reforms. By 1985, Fiat had become one of the most politically influential industrial companies in the world. Government leaders consulted Gianni about international economic policies. Fiat's expansion decisions influenced diplomatic relationships between countries. The company's technology standards affected global automotive industry development. But perhaps most importantly, Gianni had demonstrated that Italian industrial companies could compete successfully against American and Japanese multinational corporations while maintaining European family control over strategic decisions. The global expansion proved that sophisticated management and political relationships could overcome scale disadvantages in competition with larger companies. The success established the foundation for Agnelli family dominance over European industry that would continue for decades. But maintaining global leadership would require adapting to new challenges. Technological transformation, environmental regulations, and political changes that would test whether the strategies that succeeded during the Cold War could survive in an increasingly interconnected and competitive global economy. Chapter 7. Political Kingmaker. On March 16, 1978, Gianni Agnelli received a phone call that would forever change how the Italian government operated. Aldo Moro, Italy's former prime minister and the country's most respected political leader, had been kidnapped by the Red Brigade's terrorist organization while traveling to Parliament for a crucial vote on communist participation in the Italian government. The kidnappers' demands were simple but impossible. Release imprisoned Red Brigade's members or watch Moro die. The Italian government refused to negotiate with terrorists, but political leaders privately reached out to Gianni for guidance on how to handle a crisis that could determine Italy's political future for decades. What happened during the 55 days of Moro's captivity revealed the extraordinary political power that Gianni had accumulated through 3 decades of strategic relationship building, economic leverage, and careful positioning as the indispensable mediator between Italy's competing political factions. Gianni's emergence as Italy's unofficial political kingmaker began during the social upheavals of the late 1960s and early 1970s. Student protests, labor strikes, and terrorist violence had created a crisis of governance that threatened to destroy the stability necessary for continued economic growth. Traditional political leaders were paralyzed by ideological divisions that prevented effective responses to escalating social conflict. The political situation was extraordinarily complex. Christian democratic governments controlled the official apparatus of state power, but lacked popular support for implementing economic reforms. Communist and socialist parties commanded significant popular loyalty, but were excluded from government participation due to Cold War pressures. Extremist groups on both left and right were using violence to undermine democratic institutions entirely. Gianni understood that business leaders who simply opposed political change would eventually be overwhelmed by forces they couldn't control. His alternative strategy was to position Fiat and the Agnelli family as essential mediators who could bridge ideological divides while protecting the economic foundations that all political factions needed for achieving their broader objectives. The strategy required building relationships across the entire political spectrum while maintaining credibility with each faction as a reliable partner for advancing their interests. This meant supporting Christian democratic economic policies while engaging with communist leaders about worker welfare issues. It meant providing security assistance to combat terrorism while maintaining dialogue with moderate left-wing politicians who had legitimate grievances about economic inequality. Gianni's political network by the mid-1970s was unprecedented in Italian business history. He maintained personal friendships with government ministers, opposition party leaders, trade union officials, newspaper editors, and even foreign ambassadors who influenced Italian policy decisions. These relationships weren't based on simple financial contributions, but on mutual benefit arrangements that made Gianni valuable to political leaders regardless of their ideological positions. For Christian democratic politicians, Gianni provided economic expertise and international business connections that were essential for managing Italy's role in European integration and global markets. His support for moderate economic policies helped justify centrist positions against both communist criticism and conservative resistance. For communist and socialist leaders, Gianni offered pragmatic engagement with capitalist economic structures that could deliver improvements in worker welfare and living standards without requiring revolutionary transformation. Fiat's relatively generous labor policies and employment levels demonstrated that private enterprise could serve progressive social objectives. For trade union officials, Gianni provided a negotiating partner who understood that labor stability required addressing worker concerns about wages, working conditions, and job security. Fiat's collective bargaining agreements often became models for industry-wide labor contracts that balanced worker benefits with productive efficiency. The relationships provided Gianni with influence over government decision-making that exceeded what elected officials possessed. When political leaders needed advice about economic policy, they consulted Gianni before making public commitments. When international negotiations required understanding business implications, Gianni participated as an unofficial government representative. When social conflicts threatened economic stability, political factions turned to Gianni for mediation assistance. The Moro kidnapping crisis demonstrated how this political influence operated during national emergencies. While government officials debated constitutional principles and security procedures, political leaders privately sought Gianni's assessment of how different responses might affect Italy's economic and social stability. Gianni's advice during the crisis reflected his understanding that preserving democratic institutions required preventing both terrorist success and government overreaction that could justify authoritarian measures. He supported the government's refusal to negotiate with terrorists while advocating policies that would address the social grievances that made terrorist recruitment possible. More controversially, Gianni used his international business connections to explore whether foreign governments or intelligence services could provide assistance in locating Moro without officially involving Italian authorities in activities that might compromise democratic norms or sovereignty. The tragic conclusion of Moro's kidnapping, his execution after 55 days in captivity, demonstrated the limits of even Gianni's extraordinary political influence. But the crisis also revealed how completely Italian political leadership had come to depend on Agnelli guidance during periods of national emergency. Following Moro's death, Italian politics underwent a fundamental realignment that increased Gianni's influence even further. The Christian Democratic Party, traumatized by the loss of its most respected leader, became more dependent on business support for maintaining electoral viability. Communist and socialist parties, seeking to demonstrate democratic legitimacy, became more willing to compromise with capitalist economic structures. Gianni capitalized on this political realignment by promoting what he called productive collaboration between democratic political forces and private enterprise. The concept involved government policies that supported business growth while ensuring that economic benefits were distributed broadly enough to maintain social stability and political legitimacy. The collaboration model influenced Italian policy development throughout the 1980s. Government industrial policies favored companies like Fiat that provided substantial employment and contributed to export earnings. Labor regulations balanced worker protections with business flexibility requirements. Tax policies encouraged private investment while funding social programs that addressed inequality concerns. But Gianni's political influence extended beyond domestic Italian politics into European and international affairs. As Fiat's global operations expanded, he became an important voice in discussions about European economic integration, international trade policies, and diplomatic relationships between Western and communist countries. His dual role as a successful capitalist entrepreneur and a political mediator who could work with communist governments made Gianni valuable to Western leaders seeking to understand Soviet intentions during the final phases of the Cold War. He provided insights about communist economic planning that influenced NATO policy discussions about technology transfer and trade relationships. Similarly, his relationships with Western political and business leaders made Gianni useful to communist governments seeking access to advanced technology and international markets without compromising ideological principles. He served as an unofficial diplomatic channel for communications that couldn't be conducted through formal government channels. By 1985, Gianni had achieved a level of political influence that was unprecedented for a business leader in any democratic country. He was consulted by multiple governments about international policy decisions, participated in diplomatic meetings that shaped East-West relations, and served as a trusted advisor to political leaders across the ideological spectrum. The political network provided enormous benefits for Fiat's business operations. Government policies consistently favored the company's expansion plans. Regulatory decisions took into account Fiat's competitive needs. International trade negotiations considered the company's market access requirements. But perhaps most importantly, Gianni had demonstrated that sophisticated political engagement could provide business leaders with influence over government decision-making that was more effective than traditional lobbying or campaign contributions. By making himself indispensable to political leaders across competing factions, he had created a form of private power that operated parallel to democratic institutions. The model would be replicated by business leaders worldwide over the following decades. But Gianni had been the first to perfect the strategy of converting economic influence into political power while maintaining democratic legitimacy and avoiding obvious conflicts with constitutional governance. The success established the Agnelli family as permanent participants in Italian political leadership, regardless of which parties controlled government or what ideological movements gained popular support. They had made themselves too important to Italian political stability to be excluded from decision-making processes that affected their interests. Chapter 8. Modern Dynasty. Chapter 8. Modern Dynasty. In January 2003, as Gianni Agnelli lay dying in his Turin mansion, he made a decision that would determine the future of European industry for the next century. Instead of dividing the Agnelli empire among multiple heirs or selling it to international investors, he would concentrate control in his 27-year-old grandson, John Elkann, a young man who had never run a major company but possessed something more valuable than experience: the intelligence and ruthlessness necessary to adapt the family's power to a globalizing world. The succession decision was controversial, even within the Agnelli family. Gianni's daughter Margherita expected to inherit significant control over the business empire her father had built over 5 decades. Other family members questioned whether someone so young could manage the complex political and economic challenges facing Fiat in an increasingly competitive global marketplace. But Gianni understood something about dynastic power that his critics missed. Maintaining family control over essential industrial infrastructure required leaders who could think beyond traditional business models towards systematic control over the emerging digital economy. John Elkann was not an obvious choice for dynastic leadership. Born in New York to an American mother and raised internationally, he seemed more like a cosmopolitan intellectual than an Italian industrialist. He spoke multiple languages, held degrees from European universities, and had interests in technology and media that exceeded his knowledge of automotive manufacturing. But these apparently disadvantageous characteristics were precisely why Gianni chose John as his heir. The globalized economy required leaders who could navigate multiple cultures, regulatory systems, and technological environments. Traditional Italian business approaches were inadequate for competing against American technology companies, Chinese manufacturers, and German industrial conglomerates. John's international background provided capabilities that would be essential for maintaining Agnelli influence during the next phase of European economic development. His American citizenship enabled business relationships that were difficult for purely European companies to develop. His technological interests positioned him to understand how digital innovation would transform automotive manufacturing. His youth meant he could adapt to changes that would overwhelm leaders committed to traditional approaches. The transition began during 2003 as Gianni's health deteriorated, and John assumed increasing responsibility for strategic decisions affecting Fiat's future. The company was facing its most serious crisis since World War II. Global competition had reduced Fiat's market share in European automobile markets. Financial losses were approaching levels that threatened bankruptcy. Labor costs in Italian manufacturing had become uncompetitive compared to facilities in Eastern Europe and Asia. Most importantly, the automotive industry was beginning a technological transformation that would require massive investments in electric vehicles, autonomous driving systems, and digital manufacturing processes. Companies that failed to adapt to these changes would be eliminated by competitors with superior technology and more efficient production methods. John's response to these challenges demonstrated the strategic thinking that would characterize his leadership over the following decades. Instead of attempting to preserve Fiat's traditional market position through incremental improvements, he developed plans for fundamental transformation that would position the Agnelli empire at the center of automotive industry evolution. The first element of John's strategy was international consolidation. Fiat's survival required achieving the scale necessary to compete with global automotive companies that had larger production volumes and greater financial resources. This meant acquiring or merging with other companies to create an integrated manufacturing network capable of serving multiple regional markets efficiently. The opportunity came in 2009, when Chrysler Corporation faced bankruptcy during the global financial crisis. While other potential acquirers focused on Chrysler's financial problems and operational difficulties, John saw an undervalued company with valuable brand recognition, advanced technology capabilities, and access to the crucial American market. The Chrysler acquisition required navigating complex negotiations with the Obama administration, which controlled the company's bankruptcy process, and European Union regulators, who were concerned about industrial concentration in the automotive sector. John's international background and political sophistication were essential for managing these competing requirements. The deal structure demonstrated John's understanding of how to leverage government support for private business objectives. Instead of simply purchasing Chrysler through traditional financial markets, Fiat received management control in exchange for technology sharing and operational improvements that would preserve American jobs while providing Fiat with access to North American markets. The arrangement satisfied multiple political objectives while creating enormous value for the Agnelli family. American officials could claim credit for saving an iconic American company and preserving manufacturing employment. Italian politicians could highlight Fiat's role in international business expansion. Fiat gained control over manufacturing facilities, technology assets, and market access worth billions of dollars. By 2014, the Chrysler integration had transformed Fiat from a struggling European company into a global automotive corporation with operations across multiple continents. Combined production exceeded 4.8 million vehicles annually. Revenues reached $132 billion, employment totaled over 230,000 workers worldwide. But John understood that automotive manufacturing was just one component of a broader industrial strategy focused on controlling the infrastructure that would support economic development during the next century. The real opportunity was to position the Agnelli empire at the intersection of traditional manufacturing and emerging digital technologies. His solution was to diversify Exor's investments beyond automotive manufacturing into sectors that would benefit from technological convergence, media companies that would shape public understanding of industrial change, financial services that would provide capital for technological development, and luxury goods companies that would serve the global wealthy class that would emerge from economic transformation. The media investments began with increased control over traditional Italian newspapers and magazines, but expanded to include international publications that influenced government policy and business strategy. The acquisition of a significant stake in The Economist in 2015 provided access to global policy discussions while demonstrating Agnelli influence beyond Italian markets. Financial services investments focused on companies that specialized in infrastructure financing, technology development funding, and international investment management. These positions provided access to information about emerging business opportunities while generating profits from facilitating economic transformation led by other companies. Perhaps most importantly, John began developing relationships with technology company leaders who were creating the digital platforms that would determine economic power during the 21st century. These relationships provided insights about technological developments that would affect automotive manufacturing while creating opportunities for collaboration between traditional industrial companies and emerging digital platforms. The diversification strategy was generating extraordinary returns. Between 2010 and 2020, Exor's portfolio value increased by over 180%. The Agnelli family's estimated wealth exceeded $15 billion. Most importantly, the family had positioned itself to benefit from multiple sources of technological and economic change, rather than depending solely on automotive industry success. But John's greatest achievement was demonstrating that European industrial dynasties could compete successfully against American technology companies and Chinese state-supported enterprises while maintaining family control over strategic decisions. The success proved that sophisticated management and international relationships could overcome scale disadvantages in competition with larger competitors. The model established a template for how traditional industrial families could adapt to globalization and technological change while preserving dynastic power. Instead of simply preserving inherited wealth, John had shown how family control could be leveraged to capture opportunities created by economic transformation. By 2020, the Agnelli dynasty had successfully navigated the transition from traditional manufacturing to global industrial leadership while maintaining the family control that Giovanni had established in 1899. They had proven that dynastic power could survive and thrive through technological revolution, international competition, and political change. But maintaining this success would require adapting to new challenges that would test whether the strategies that succeeded during the 20th century could survive in an increasingly digital and environmentally conscious global economy. Chapter 9. Digital Transformation. In March 2021, John Elkann stood before a gathering of the world's most powerful automotive executives and announced something that shocked the industry. Stellantis, the company created by merging Fiat Chrysler with French automaker PSA, would invest $35 billion in electric vehicle development over the next 4 years, more than Tesla's total market value just 5 years earlier. But the electric vehicle investment was just the visible component of a far more ambitious strategy. John was positioning the Agnelli empire to control the digital infrastructure that would determine which companies survived the transformation from traditional automotive manufacturing to mobility-as-a-service platforms that would redefine transportation globally. The announcement represented the most dramatic strategic pivot in Agnelli family history, since Giovanni's decision to enter automobile manufacturing in 1899. John was betting the family's 125-year industrial legacy on his belief that digital technology would create opportunities for unprecedented wealth concentration among companies that could integrate traditional manufacturing with emerging platform technologies. The strategy required understanding how technological convergence was creating new forms of economic power that transcended traditional industry boundaries. Automotive manufacturing was becoming just one component of integrated mobility systems that included autonomous driving software, electric vehicle charging networks, shared transportation platforms, and data analytics services that optimized traffic flow and vehicle utilization. Companies that controlled multiple components of these integrated systems would be able to extract profits from every aspect of transportation, while competitors that focused on single components would be gradually marginalized. John realized that Stellantis needed to become a mobility platform company rather than simply an automotive manufacturer. The electric vehicle investment was designed to position Stellantis as one of the few companies capable of producing electric vehicles at the scale necessary to serve global markets. By 2024, Stellantis planned to offer electric versions of all major vehicle models while developing battery technology that would provide competitive advantages over companies that relied on external suppliers. But John understood that electric vehicle production was just the entry requirement for competing in future mobility markets. The real opportunity was to control the digital platforms that would connect vehicles, infrastructure, and users into integrated transportation networks that could optimize efficiency while extracting maximum profits from every transaction. His solution was to position Stellantis as the bridge between traditional automotive manufacturing and emerging technology companies that were developing autonomous driving systems, electric vehicle charging networks, and mobility service platforms. Instead of competing directly with technology companies, Stellantis would provide the manufacturing infrastructure that would enable digital platforms to deliver services to consumers. The strategy began with massive investments in autonomous driving technology. Stellantis established partnerships with technology companies developing artificial intelligence systems for vehicle navigation, safety monitoring, and traffic optimization. These partnerships provided access to advanced technology while maintaining Stellantis' control over vehicle manufacturing and customer relationships. The autonomous driving investments were extraordinarily expensive but essential for future competitiveness. Fully autonomous vehicles would eliminate the need for individual car ownership among many consumers, while creating opportunities for shared transportation services that generated profits from vehicle utilization rather than vehicle sales. Companies that controlled both vehicle manufacturing and autonomous driving technology would be able to offer integrated transportation services that competitors couldn't match. They could optimize vehicle design for shared use, coordinate maintenance and charging schedules automatically, and extract profits from both manufacturing and service provision. But John's most ambitious digital strategy involved creating an integrated ecosystem of mobility services that would generate recurring revenue from transportation activities rather than one-time profits from vehicle sales. This ecosystem would include electric vehicle charging networks, shared transportation platforms, vehicle maintenance services, and insurance products customized for electric and autonomous vehicles. The charging network investment alone required over $8 billion in infrastructure development across Europe and North America. But control over charging networks would provide Stellantis with ongoing relationships with electric vehicle owners while creating opportunities to sell additional services, including vehicle maintenance, insurance, and upgraded transportation options. The shared transportation platform would enable Stellantis vehicles to generate profits throughout their operational lifetime, rather than just during initial sale. Vehicles optimized for shared use could operate 10 to 12 hours daily, instead of sitting unused 95% of the time like privately owned vehicles. This utilization efficiency would generate multiple revenue streams from the same manufacturing investment. Perhaps most importantly, the integrated ecosystem would generate enormous amounts of data about transportation patterns, consumer preferences, and infrastructure utilization that could be monetized through analytic services sold to governments, urban planners, and other companies seeking to optimize transportation systems. The data strategy was modeled on the success of technology companies that had built platform businesses by providing services that generated valuable information about user behavior. Stellantis would provide mobility services that created comprehensive databases about transportation needs, while developing analytics capabilities that could be sold as separate business services. By 2023, the digital transformation strategy was generating results that exceeded initial projections. Stellantis had become the world's third largest automaker by revenue, while developing technology capabilities that positioned the company to compete with both traditional automotive manufacturers and emerging mobility platform companies. The electric vehicle investments had enabled Stellantis to capture significant market share in the fastest growing segment of the automotive industry. Electric vehicle sales were growing 40% annually in European markets, while traditional vehicle sales remained flat. Companies that had invested early in electric vehicle technology were gaining competitive advantages that would be difficult for slower-moving competitors to overcome. The autonomous driving partnerships were providing access to technology that would be essential for future competitiveness while maintaining Stellantis control over vehicle manufacturing and customer relationships. Early testing indicated that fully autonomous vehicles would be commercially viable by 2027-2028, creating opportunities for transportation services that would generate substantially higher profits than traditional vehicle sales. The charging network investments were creating infrastructure that would be essential for electric vehicle adoption, while providing Stellantis with ongoing relationships with customers and opportunities to sell additional services. Control over charging infrastructure would provide competitive advantages similar to those that oil companies had gained through gasoline station networks. But John understood that the digital transformation created risks as well as opportunities. Technology companies with enormous financial resources were also developing mobility platforms that could displace traditional automotive manufacturers. Chinese companies supported by government funding were making massive investments in electric vehicle technology and autonomous driving systems. His response was to accelerate Stellantis' transformation into a technology company that happened to manufacture vehicles rather than a manufacturing company that used technology. This meant recruiting software engineers, data scientists, and platform developers while maintaining the manufacturing expertise that would enable Stellantis to deliver technology services at scale. The recruitment strategy focused on attracting talent from technology companies that understood platform business models while providing them with opportunities to work on transportation challenges that were more complex and socially significant than typical technology company projects. By 2024, Stellantis employed over 12,000 software engineers and data scientists, more than many pure technology companies. The engineering team was developing proprietary software for autonomous driving, electric vehicle optimization, charging network management, and transportation analytics that would provide competitive advantages over companies that relied on external technology suppliers. The digital transformation had positioned the Agnelli family to maintain control over essential transportation infrastructure while adapting to technological changes that were eliminating traditional automotive manufacturing companies. They had proven once again that sophisticated strategic thinking and massive capital investments could enable family control to survive and thrive through fundamental economic transformation. But maintaining this success would require navigating challenges that would test whether even the Agnelli family's extraordinary adaptability could survive the most fundamental threat they had ever faced: a civil war within the family itself that threatened to destroy everything 5 generations had built. In January 2003, as Gianni Agnelli lay dying in his Turin mansion, he made a decision that would determine the future of European industry for the next century. Instead of dividing the Agnelli empire among multiple heirs or selling it to international investors, he would concentrate control in his 27-year-old grandson, John Elkann, a young man who had never run a major company, but possessed something more valuable than experience: the intelligence and ruthlessness necessary to adapt the family's power to a globalizing world. The succession decision was controversial, even within the Agnelli family. Gianni's daughter Margherita expected to inherit significant control over the business empire her father had built over 5 decades. Other family members questioned whether someone so young could manage the complex political and economic challenges facing Fiat in an increasingly competitive global marketplace. But Gianni understood something about dynastic power that his critics missed. Maintaining family control over essential industrial infrastructure required leaders who could think beyond traditional business models towards systematic control over the emerging digital economy. John Elkann was not an obvious choice for dynastic leadership. Born in New York to an American mother and raised internationally, he seemed more like a cosmopolitan intellectual than an Italian industrialist. He spoke multiple languages, held degrees from European universities, and had interests in technology and media that exceeded his knowledge of automotive manufacturing. But these apparently disadvantageous characteristics were precisely why Gianni chose John as his heir. The globalized economy required leaders who could navigate multiple cultures, regulatory systems, and technological environments. Traditional Italian business approaches were inadequate for competing against American technology companies, Chinese manufacturers, and German industrial conglomerates. John's international background provided capabilities that would be essential for maintaining Agnelli influence during the next phase of European economic development. His American citizenship enabled business relationships that were difficult for purely European companies to develop. His technological interests positioned him to understand how digital innovation would transform automotive manufacturing. His youth meant he could adapt to changes that would overwhelm leaders committed to traditional approaches. The transition began during 2003 as Gianni's health deteriorated, and John assumed increasing responsibility for strategic decisions affecting Fiat's future. The company was facing its most serious crisis since World War II. Global competition had reduced Fiat's market share in European automobile markets. Financial losses were approaching levels that threatened bankruptcy. Labor costs in Italian manufacturing had become uncompetitive compared to facilities in Eastern Europe and Asia. Most importantly, the automotive industry was beginning a technological transformation that would require massive investments in electric vehicles, autonomous driving systems, and digital manufacturing processes. Companies that failed to adapt to these changes would be eliminated by competitors with superior technology and more efficient production methods. John's response to these challenges demonstrated the strategic thinking that would characterize his leadership over the following decades. Instead of attempting to preserve Fiat's traditional market position through incremental improvements, he developed plans for fundamental transformation that would position the Agnelli empire at the center of automotive industry evolution. The first element of John's strategy was international consolidation. Fiat's survival required achieving the scale necessary to compete with global automotive companies that had larger production volumes and greater financial resources. This meant acquiring or merging with other companies to create an integrated manufacturing network capable of serving multiple regional markets efficiently. The opportunity came in 2009, when Chrysler Corporation faced bankruptcy during the global financial crisis. While other potential acquirers focused on Chrysler's financial problems and operational difficulties, John saw an undervalued company with valuable brand recognition, advanced technology capabilities, and access to the crucial American market. The Chrysler acquisition required navigating complex negotiations with the Obama administration, which controlled the company's bankruptcy process, and European Union regulators, who were concerned about industrial concentration in the automotive sector. John's international background and political sophistication were essential for managing these competing requirements. The deal structure demonstrated John's understanding of how to leverage government support for private business objectives. Instead of simply purchasing Chrysler through traditional financial markets, Fiat received management control in exchange for technology sharing and operational improvements that would preserve American jobs while providing Fiat with access to North American markets. The arrangement satisfied multiple political objectives while creating enormous value for the Agnelli family. American officials could claim credit for saving an iconic American company and preserving manufacturing employment. Italian politicians could highlight Fiat's role in international business expansion. Fiat gained control over manufacturing facilities, technology assets, and market access worth billions of dollars. By 2014, the Chrysler integration had transformed Fiat from a struggling European company into a global automotive corporation with operations across multiple continents. Combined production exceeded 4.8 million vehicles annually. Revenues reached $132 billion, employment totaled over 230,000 workers worldwide. But John understood that automotive manufacturing was just one component of a broader industrial strategy focused on controlling the infrastructure that would support economic development during the next century. The real opportunity was to position the Agnelli empire at the intersection of traditional manufacturing and emerging digital technologies. His solution was to diversify Exor's investments beyond automotive manufacturing into sectors that would benefit from technological convergence. media companies that would shape public understanding of industrial change, financial services that would provide capital for technological development, and luxury goods companies that would serve the global wealthy class that would emerge from economic transformation. The media investments began with increased control over traditional Italian newspapers and magazines, but expanded to include international publications that influenced government policy and business strategy. The acquisition of a significant stake in The Economist in 2015 provided access to global policy discussions while demonstrating Agnelli influence beyond Italian markets. Financial services investments focused on companies that specialized in infrastructure financing, technology development funding, and international investment management. These positions provided access to information about emerging business opportunities while generating profits from facilitating economic transformation led by other companies. Perhaps most importantly, John began developing relationships with technology company leaders who were creating the digital platforms that would determine economic power during the 21st century. These relationships provided insights about technological developments that would affect automotive manufacturing, while creating opportunities for collaboration between traditional industrial companies and emerging digital platforms. The diversification strategy was generating extraordinary returns. Between 2010 and 2020, Exor's portfolio value increased by over 180%. The Agnelli family's estimated wealth exceeded $15 billion. Most importantly, the family had positioned itself to benefit from multiple sources of technological and economic change, rather than depending solely on automotive industry success. But John's greatest achievement was demonstrating that European industrial dynasties could compete successfully against American technology companies and Chinese state-supported enterprises while maintaining family control over strategic decisions. The success proved that sophisticated management and international relationships could overcome scale disadvantages in competition with larger competitors. The model established a template for how traditional industrial families could adapt to globalization and technological change while preserving dynastic power. Instead of simply preserving inherited wealth, John had shown how family control could be leveraged to capture opportunities created by economic transformation. By 2020, the Agnelli dynasty had successfully navigated the transition from traditional manufacturing to global industrial leadership while maintaining the family control that Giovanni had established in 1899. They had proven that dynastic power could survive and thrive through technological revolution, international competition, and political change. But maintaining this success would require adapting to new challenges that would test whether the strategies that succeeded during the 20th century could survive in an increasingly digital and environmentally conscious global economy. Chapter 9: Digital Transformation. In March 2021, John Elkann stood before a gathering of the world's most powerful automotive executives and announced something that shocked the industry. Stellantis, the company created by merging Fiat Chrysler with French automaker PSA, would invest $35 billion in electric vehicle development over the next 4 years, more than Tesla's total market value just 5 years earlier. But the electric vehicle investment was just the visible component of a far more ambitious strategy. John was positioning the Agnelli empire to control the digital infrastructure that would determine which companies survived the transformation from traditional automotive manufacturing to mobility-as-a-service platforms that would redefine transportation globally. The announcement represented the most dramatic strategic pivot in Agnelli family history, since Giovanni's decision to enter automobile manufacturing in 1899. John was betting the family's 125-year industrial legacy on his belief that digital technology would create opportunities for unprecedented wealth concentration among companies that could integrate traditional manufacturing with emerging platform technologies. The strategy required understanding how technological convergence was creating new forms of economic power that transcended traditional industry boundaries. Automotive manufacturing was becoming just one component of integrated mobility systems that included autonomous driving software, electric vehicle charging networks, shared transportation platforms, and data analytics services that optimized traffic flow and vehicle utilization. Companies that controlled multiple components of these integrated systems would be able to extract profits from every aspect of transportation, while competitors that focused on single components would be gradually marginalized. John realized that Stellantis needed to become a mobility platform company rather than simply an automotive manufacturer. The electric vehicle investment was designed to position Stellantis as one of the few companies capable of producing electric vehicles at the scale necessary to serve global markets. By 2024, Stellantis planned to offer electric versions of all major vehicle models while developing battery technology that would provide competitive advantages over companies that relied on external suppliers. But John understood that electric vehicle production was just the entry requirement for competing in future mobility markets. The real opportunity was to control the digital platforms that would connect vehicles, infrastructure, and users into integrated transportation networks that could optimize efficiency while extracting maximum profits from every transaction. His solution was to position Stellantis as the bridge between traditional automotive manufacturing and emerging technology companies that were developing autonomous driving systems, electric vehicle charging networks, and mobility service platforms. Instead of competing directly with technology companies, Stellantis would provide the manufacturing infrastructure that would enable digital platforms to deliver services to consumers. The strategy began with massive investments in autonomous driving technology. Stellantis established partnerships with technology companies developing artificial intelligence systems for vehicle navigation, safety monitoring, and traffic optimization. These partnerships provided access to advanced technology while maintaining Stellantis' control over vehicle manufacturing and customer relationships. The autonomous driving investments were extraordinarily expensive but essential for future competitiveness. Fully autonomous vehicles would eliminate the need for individual car ownership among many consumers, while creating opportunities for shared transportation services that generated profits from vehicle utilization rather than vehicle sales. Companies that controlled both vehicle manufacturing and autonomous driving technology would be able to offer integrated transportation services that competitors couldn't match. They could optimize vehicle design for shared use, coordinate maintenance and charging schedules automatically, and extract profits from both manufacturing and service provision. But John's most ambitious digital strategy involved creating an integrated ecosystem of mobility services that would generate recurring revenue from transportation activities rather than one-time profits from vehicle sales. This ecosystem would include electric vehicle charging networks, shared transportation platforms, vehicle maintenance services, and insurance products customized for electric and autonomous vehicles. The charging network investment alone required over $8 billion in infrastructure development across Europe and North America. But control over charging networks would provide Stellantis with ongoing relationships with electric vehicle owners while creating opportunities to sell additional services, including vehicle maintenance, insurance, and upgraded transportation options. The shared transportation platform would enable Stellantis vehicles to generate profits throughout their operational lifetime, rather than just during initial sale. Vehicles optimized for shared use could operate 10 to 12 hours daily, instead of sitting unused 95% of the time like privately owned vehicles. This utilization efficiency would generate multiple revenue streams from the same manufacturing investment. Perhaps most importantly, the integrated ecosystem would generate enormous amounts of data about transportation patterns, consumer preferences, and infrastructure utilization that could be monetized through analytics services sold to governments, urban planners, and other companies seeking to optimize transportation systems. The data strategy was modeled on the success of technology companies that had built platform businesses by providing services that generated valuable information about user behavior. Stellantis would provide mobility services that created comprehensive databases about transportation needs, while developing analytics capabilities that could be sold as separate business services. By 2023, the digital transformation strategy was generating results that exceeded initial projections. Stellantis had become the world's third largest automaker by revenue, while developing technology capabilities that positioned the company to compete with both traditional automotive manufacturers and emerging mobility platform companies. The electric vehicle investments had enabled Stellantis to capture significant market share in the fastest-growing segment of the automotive industry. Electric vehicle sales were growing 40% annually in European markets, while traditional vehicle sales remained flat. Companies that had invested early in electric vehicle technology were gaining competitive advantages that would be difficult for slower-moving competitors to overcome.